In 642, Arab armies marched unopposed into Alexandria. But how did we get here? The answer to that is 2.5 centuries in the making. In 395, the Roman Empire's division became permanent, and Egypt belonged to the Eastern Roman Empire. Christianity, strengthened by imperial laws from Constantinople, now framed public life. After the anti-pagan decrees, the Serapeum at Alexandria was destroyed in 391, a symbolic end to temple cults in the city. The new Christian order quickly reshaped Egyptian society. The Patriarch of Alexandria, the Pope of the Egyptian Church, emerged as a figure of immense influence, often outweighing imperial administrators. Alexandria, Egypt's cosmopolitan capital, remained a center of Greek culture and learning, but tensions grew between the remaining pagan intellectuals and the zealous Christian crowds. In 415, amid factional strife, a Christian mob murdered the philosopher Hypatia, an event marking the decisive eclipse of classical Hellenic culture in Egypt. The same year, Jews were expelled from Alexandria. The next struggle was church against state. The Parabalani, a brotherhood that voluntarily undertook the care of the sick and the burial of the dead, also acted as the Patriarch's muscle. By the early 5th century, the Coptic language, the latest stage of the ancient Egyptian tongue, written in Greek script, was becoming widely used by the native populace. The growth of Coptic language and literature, including biblical translations and monastic writings, gave the Egyptians a distinct cultural identity within the Greek-speaking empire. Churches and monasteries acquired vast landholdings and wealth, and clergy often mediated in local affairs. This meant the Patriarch of Alexandria not only guided religious life, but also influenced secular matters. In some cases, the Patriarch's authority even eclipsed that of the imperial governor. Egyptians read scripture in Sahidic and Bohairic, the latter later becoming the liturgical norm. They dated years by the era of the martyrs, the year of Diocletian's accession. During this era, the Egyptian church was at the forefront of all Christian theology. Alexandria's bishops were key players in major doctrinal debates of the universal church. In 431, St. Cyril of Alexandria, the fiery patriarch, led the charge against Nestorianism at the Council of Ephesus. Cyril's triumph in affirming Mary as Mother of God and Christ's unity cemented Alexandria's reputation as a guardian of orthodoxy. But new controversies soon arose over how to understand Christ's divine and his human nature. These Christological debates would soon climax. The pivotal event was the Council of Chalcedon in 451. At this ecumenical council, the Christian Church's fourth, the Imperial Church declared that Christ exists in two natures, without confusion, change, division, or separation, called a Diophysite doctrine. To the Alexandrian theologians, the imperial decree seemed to split Christ into two and was unacceptable. They instead espoused the theology of St. Cyril, which spoke of Christ's one incarnate nature, uniting full humanity and full divinity without confusion or division, a Miaphysite doctrine. The Alexandrian Church was convinced that political motives had trumped true doctrine. This schism severed the Egyptian Church from the imperial communion of Rome and Constantinople and launched what would become the independent Coptic Orthodox Church of Alexandria. The Byzantine emperor installed a Chalcedonian patriarch in Alexandria, but it immediately led to violent turmoil. In 457, amid the succession crisis after Emperor Marcion's death, Alexandrian crowds killed the imperial patriarch Praetorius on Holy Thursday and acclaimed a Miaphysite ally, Timothy Allurus, as patriarch. Over the next decades, rival popes, one backed by Constantinople, another by the native clergy, contended for the throne of St. Mark, while emperors alternated between crackdowns and compromise. In 482, Emperor Zeno issued an edict aiming to reconcile differences. This allowed a moderate Miaphysite, Peter Mongus, to become recognized Patriarch of Alexandria. Even so, true unity proved elusive. The post of patriarch continued to be contested by both the Coptic and Chalcedonians, but in 536 it officially split. This created two rival lines of succession that defined Egypt for centuries. The majority followed the Coptic patriarch, remaining more nationalistic and resentful of Byzantine domination. A minority, mostly Byzantine officials, adhered to the Chalcedonian or Melkite line. Both still exist today. After Chalcedon, religious strife became a defining feature of Egyptian society in late antiquity. In periods of strong imperial control, like under Emperor Justinian, the state appointed Chalcedonian bishops in Egypt and occasionally persecuted the Coptic clergy. When imperial power waned or emperors were more sympathetic, like the Miaphysite-leaning Anastasius, the Coptic hierarchy operated more freely. Amid these religious contests, Egyptian monasticism flourished. The monastic life we so often associate with the medieval era began here. It was the Egyptian desert that had given birth to monastic life in the late 3rd to 4th centuries, with pioneers like St. Anthony and St. Pachomius, and reached its zenith around the 5th century. By this time, there were hundreds of monasteries and thousands of hermits in the hills and deserts of Egypt. Monasteries became centers of spiritual life, scholarship, and even economic activity. The White Monastery of St. Shenoute in Upper Egypt grew from 30 monks to an astonishing 2,200 monks and 1,800 nuns by Shenoute's death in 466. In the Nitrian Desert in northwestern Egypt, Wadi Natrun remained a living cluster of monasteries. West of Alexandria, the sanctuary of Abu Mena grew into one of Christendom's great pilgrimage complexes, with basilicas, dormitories, baths, and wine presses. Such institutions not only sustained religious devotion, but also provided education, charity, and refuge, forming self-contained communities within society. Though imperial laws banned sacrifice, traditional worship lingered at Philae. A treaty in 452 guaranteed Nubians access to the Isis image, but this ended under Justinian, when the temples were officially closed and several converted to churches. By the 6th century, Egypt was overwhelmingly Christian in faith, though a rich variety of sects and ideas remained, like the Gnostic groups. Though many Gnostic sects used Christian language and revered Jesus, they were not considered truly Christian by the mainstream church. Gnostics often rejected the God of the Old Testament as a false or lesser God, denied Christ's resurrection, and taught that salvation came through secret knowledge reserved for a spiritual elite. The Church Fathers condemned Gnosticism as heresy, and they faded by the end of the Byzantine period. In 539, the Emperor Justinian abolished the old diocese, and Egypt proper, the Thebaid, Augustamnica, and the Libyan provinces each fell under a commander who combined the powers of governor and general, called the Dux. It explicitly aimed to check the influence of Alexandria's bishops over the countryside. Coptic Egypt also developed a unique artistic style. Coptic art and architecture blended Egyptian and Greco-Roman elements into a new Christian expression. Decorative arts flourished with wall paintings, textiles, and carvings, commonly depicting biblical scenes and saints. You might see figures like the Virgin and Child, incorporating earlier motifs from Egyptian mythology or Hellenistic art. This syncretic imagery suggests that late antique Egyptians did not abruptly discard their cultural heritage, but repurposed it in service of the new faith. In the mid-6th century, the Miaphysite philosopher John the Grammarian reworked Aristotle with striking originality, arguing against an eternal cosmos and proposing a theory of impetus, similar to the concept of inertia. His works traveled in Syriac and Arabic and later shaped debates in medieval Europe. Throughout the 500s, Byzantine-Egyptian relations remained strained by religion. Emperors continued efforts at compromise. Justinian I tried to appease the non-Chalcedonians, but this did little to heal the rift. In the 600s, Emperor Heraclius proposed a new formula. Instead of discussing natures, he proposed that Christ had one divine human will, a concept called monothelitism, hoping this would reconcile the Copts. In Egypt, Heraclius's appointee, Patriarch Cyrus of Alexandria, implemented the compromise in 633, but it backfired. Most Copts saw monothelitism as an imperial trick, and Cyrus resorted to the age-old practice of brutal persecution to enforce unity. Pope Benjamin I, the Coptic patriarch at the time, had to flee for his life and went into hiding in the western deserts. This oppressive climate further alienated the Coptic populace from Byzantine rule. Beyond Egypt's borders, the influence of the Coptic Church spread west into Libya and south into Nubia. Cyrenaica was an ecclesiastical province under the jurisdiction of Alexandria. A notable figure is Synesius of Cyrene, a native Libyan who studied in Alexandria under Hypatia and was later consecrated Bishop of Ptolemais in 410. Synesius revered Alexandria's intellectual heritage and its Christian leadership. Ptolemais alone had 9 basilicas by the late Byzantine period. Even more dramatic was the conversion of Nubia in the 6th century. Nubia had long been Egypt's neighbor, sometimes its enemy. The old kingdom of Kush had dissolved. In its place, people from the western desert, the Nobadai, founded Nobadia in Lower Nubia around year 400. They were invited by Rome to protect Roman borders against raiders from the eastern desert, the Blemis. In Middle Nubia, some Noba migrants mixed with the older populations of Kush to form a new kingdom called Makuria, while deep in Upper Nubia, around modern Khartoum, the kingdom of Alodia later emerged. According to chroniclers at the time, Empress Theodora, wife of Emperor Justinian, was a sympathizer of the Miaphysite cause and dispatched a missionary named Julian to the Nubian kingdom of Nobatia. Justinian, though, reportedly sent a rival Chalcedonian mission, but Theodora successfully had them delayed, so Julian arrived first, and the Nobadian king Silko embraced Christianity at once and accepted baptism. Julian spent 2 years evangelizing and was succeeded by Bishop Longinus, another Coptic missionary, who pushed the mission further south. Longinus not only consolidated the church in Nobatia, but also travelled to the kingdom of Alodia, where he baptized the Alwan king, his family and nobles. Makuria, in Middle Nubia, initially had ties to Chalcedonian Christianity, but later aligned with Coptic Alexandria. All 3 Nubian kingdoms were Christian by the end of the 6th century. In the early 7th century, a series of external shocks finally broke Byzantine control over Egypt. The first came from the age-old eastern rival, the Sasanian Persian Empire. The Byzantine Empire was reeling from the tyrannical rule of Emperor Phocas and his coup that placed him in power for 8 long years. Seizing an opportune moment, Shah Khosrow II, the king of kings of Iran, launched an invasion of the Near East. Persian armies rapidly conquered Syria and Palestine by 614, then turned to the riches of Egypt. In 618, a Persian force under General Shahrbaraz swept into the Nile Delta. Alexandria, after a stubborn resistance, fell to the Persians, marking the first time in nearly a millennium that Egypt succumbed to a foreign invader. By June 21st, the Persians had overrun the country, extinguishing Byzantine administration. The occupation lasted roughly a decade. It is said the Persians prohibited the ordination of new bishops in Egypt and even massacred hundreds of monks in their desert monasteries. These reports suggest that the Zoroastrian Persians, perhaps in collusion with local Jews or pagans, were hostile to the overwhelmingly Christian populace. It's also possible the Persians were mainly interested in Egypt's wealth. They certainly extracted treasure and grain. The loss of Egypt's grain shipments was disastrous for Constantinople. Heraclius waged a brilliant counter-offensive against Persia in the 620s. By 627, he defeated Khosrau and a peace treaty restored conquered territories, and Persian troops withdrew a year later. Heraclius returned to a province gravely weakened. The decade of war and occupation had shaken Egypt's economy and further estranged the people. Worse, Heraclius's attempt to impose religious unity via Cyrus's persecutions had only just preceded the Persian War, and the people were still resentful of Byzantine rule. As one threat vanished, another was forming in the sands of Arabia. Here, the Prophet Muhammad had founded a new faith. In 632, Muhammad declared a jihad against Byzantium, a struggle that his successors would pursue. After Muhammad's death, the Rashidun Caliphate's armies burst out of Arabia with astonishing speed. They crushed Byzantine forces in Palestine and Syria at the Battle of Yarmouk. And then, in 639, a small but determined Arab army led by General Amr ibn al-As marched on Egypt. Many Egyptians, particularly Copts, were lukewarm about defending the Byzantine regime. The Chalcedonian patriarch Cyrus especially, who also held the governor's post, had become deeply unpopular due to his prior persecutions. Ahmed's forces secured the eastern delta and won a significant victory at Heliopolis near Memphis in July 640, where 15,000 Arabs defeated a larger Byzantine Egyptian force. The Arabs then besieged Babylon Fortress, the old Roman stronghold, and after a long siege, Babylon fell to Amr on April 6, 641. This opened the way to Alexandria. After over 650 years, Roman and Byzantine control in Egypt came to an end. A new era of Islamic rule began. The Byzantines didn't just lose Egypt by the sword, but by losing the heart of its own people. The Coptic Church established its independence and would continue as the spiritual home of Egypt's Christians under Muslim rule, preserving the Coptic language in liturgy and texts, and maintained ancient monasteries that still stand today as monuments of that age. As Egypt passed into Islamic hands, the struggle for Africa was far from over. We go back to the west, where a new kingdom had already risen in Carthage under the Vandals, and soon the Byzantine Empire would launch a bloody war to the west, a war of reconquest.